Hi, this is section 313, and what we are going to learn here is how to use the quadratic formula. So just for a little background, in let's say in the last homework we had something like x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. And we were supposed to factor that. So we started off by putting our two empty sets of parentheses. I have x and x. Factors of 3 would be 1 and 3. Signs are the same, they're both pluses. So they add up to 4, which is what I wanted. So I have a 1 and a 3. I would then take, each of these using the zero product property, set them equal to 0, and get x is -1 or x is -3. So there would be my two answers, okay? Now, there's another way that we could have solved this using what's called the quadratic formula. So typically, if a problem is pretty easy to factor like this one is, then we will just factor it because it's a little bit quicker. But if we can't factor it or we don't want to factor it, we can always use the quadratic formula and we will get the same result. So the quadratic formula, and I'm just gonna put these answers, -1, -3, on the side there. I'm going to erase all of this and I'll show you how the quadratic formula works. So for starters, the formula is this: x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 ac. And that whole thing is over 2a. So this is the quadratic formula, which does not make a lot of sense until you figure out what a, b, and c are. So a is always the coefficient, it's the number in front of your squared variable. So in this case it's a 1, it doesn't show the 1, but if there's nothing there then it's a 1. So this is my a, my b is always next to the x or whatever variable it is, and my c is always the constant number. It's the number that does not have the letter next to it. So I would label a is 1, b is 4, c is 3, and then my recommendation is that you put empty sets of parentheses for all of your letters over there. So x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a, and then insert the values for a, b, and c. So this was a b, that'd be a 4. This is a b, so that's a 4. This is an a 1, c is 3, and a is 1. So this, if we solve that, will give us the same two answers. So let's go ahead and see what we get. You can put all of this in your calculator, although you have to be really careful of all your parentheses. You can also put pieces of it in your calculator and then write down what you have and kind of consolidate it that way. So this is a -4. Plus or minus means I have two different problems. It's -4 plus this or -4 minus this. So I should end up with two solutions like we had up here. So, so 4 squared is 16, and then 4 times 1 is 4 times 3 is 12, so that's -12 all over 2. So I get, I don't know if you can see this or not, -4 plus or minus the square root of 4 all over 2. But the square root of 4, so I should probably, I think I'm off my screen here. So I'm going to rewrite it right up here. So I get -4 plus or minus the square root of 4, which is 2, all over 2, which equals a -4 plus 2 over 2, whatever that ends up being, or -4 minus 2 over 2. So -4 plus 2 is -2 divided by 2 is -1. -4 minus 2 is -6 divided by 2 is -3. So you see we get the same two answers. This is a lot more work when we have the opportunity to factor like we did before. It's typically easier to factor, but a lot of students struggle with factoring. So one of the things that's a nice safety net about the quadratic formula is that you can use it for any trinomial to try to figure out what your variable would be, in this case x. Okay, so this is what we're doing for all of the questions on section 3.13. So I'm going to leave the quadratic formula there. Now I also have a worksheet that I've created that will help guide you with plugging in your a, b, and c on the quadratic formula, and I will I'll attach that to the module where you find the videos. Okay, so if I look at problem number 2, it's got 2x squared minus x minus 3 equals 0. This is for my problem. First thing I would do would be to identify my a, which is there, my b, and my c. A, B, C. So in this case, my a is 2, my b is -1, because that's what would be there, and my c is -3. And then I would plug them into my quadratic formula and try to solve that. So what I want to do is I just want to run through, this was question number 2. I want to run through the setup of each question, and then I'll leave it up to you to solve it. And of course, you're welcome to ask questions if you struggle with something. So on question number 1, mine says 81x squared. This is number 1. 81x squared minus 16 equals 0. Notice I'm missing the term that just has the x in it. So this would be the equivalent of having a 0x. If I simplified this, I will get what I started with, but this helps you to see what your a, b, and c are. So in this case, a is 81 because that's attached to the x squared. B is 0 because it did not exist for that term, and c is -16. And you would just plug those in and use your calculator the best you can to simplify that quadratic formula. Okay, let's look at question 3. Question 3 starts off, for mine, 8 minus 9x equals 7x squared. Okay, now here's the thing. In order to do the quadratic formula, what we first need to do is get this in what we call standard form. So we need all of the terms on one side with a 0 left on the other side. So what I could do is I could add the 9x to both sides. So I would get 8 equals 7x squared plus 9x, and then subtract the 8 from both sides. So I get 0 equals 7x squared plus 9x minus 8. So this is what we call standard form, and this allows us to go ahead and use the quadratic formula. So it's easy now to see that my a is 7, my b is 9, and my c is -8, and I would just plug those in. That was question 3. Now, they don't actually make you finish this problem on question 3. They only want you to show them how to set it up in the correct form and then identify a, b, and c. So that's nice of them. Question 4 is already set up, and so That one's pretty straightforward. Question 5. Mine says m squared minus 10 equals 3m, and they want me to use the quadratic formula to solve this. But notice I don't have everything on one side with 0 on the other, so I'm going to move this 3m. Now it's not like any of those other terms, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in the middle because that makes it the descending order that we're used to. And now I can identify that my A is 1, my B is -3, and my C is -10. Okay, so question 6 also starts off out of proper format. So we've got 12y squared equals 3 minus 5y. So let me move the 5y. I'll get 12y squared plus 5y equals 3. And then I'll move the 3. 12y squared plus 5y minus 3 equals 0. So now it's in standard format. And my A is 12, my B is 5, my C is -3. Question 7, you will also need to move 2 of your terms over so that you have a 0 on one side, just like we did on the last couple questions. And then question 8 and also question 9, they just give you a slightly different set of instructions, but it's the same thing. So I've got y equals 21x squared minus 46x plus 24. And the instructions say find the zeros of the quadratic function. What they mean is replace the y with a 0 and use your quadratic formula. So in my problem, A is 21, B is -46, C is 24. So it's just a different way of asking the same questions. So this concludes 3.13. Look for the worksheet that I'll put on the modules as well on Canvas. Okay, talk to you guys later.